The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of the Skyline office complex as a woman in jeans and a simple sweater approached the entrance. She wasn't dressed like the usual crowd that streamed through these doors every weekday. No designer suit, no briefcase, just a phone in her hand and determination in her step. She had a good reason to dress casually today. Weekend inspections had become her ritual over the years, a chance to see her buildings as they really were, not just how people presented them when they knew the owner was coming. The practice had served her well as she built her real estate empire from nothing. The new security guard at the desk looked up from his phone, his eyes narrowing as she walked closer. He was middle-aged with graying hair at his temples and a crisp uniform that still had that fresh from the dry cleaner shine. The name tag on his chest read B. Thompson. "Excuse me, miss," he called out, his voice carrying that particular tone security guards often use when they've already decided someone doesn't belong. "This is a private building. Where do you think you're going?" She stopped, offering a polite smile. "Good morning. I'm here to do an inspection." The guard's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a short laugh that made her stomach tighten. "An inspection? Of what exactly?" His eyes traveled from her casual shoes to her unstyled hair, making no attempt to hide his skepticism. "I need to check on some maintenance issues that were reported," she explained calmly, though she could feel her heart starting to beat faster. She'd been through this before, too many times to count, but it never got easier. "Right," he drawled, standing up from his chair. "And who authorized this? Inspection?" He made air quotes with his fingers, the gesture dripping with condescension. "I don't need authorization. I'm the owner of the building." She kept her voice steady, professional. The guard's face reddened slightly, but his smirk only grew wider. "Listen, miss, I've worked security for 20 years. I know all the property owners in this area," and he paused, giving her another pointed once over. "Well, let's just say you don't fit the profile." She pulled out her phone, ready to call her building manager, but the guard held up his hand. "I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We can't have people walking in here making wild claims. This is a professional establishment." Just then, a white man in a golf shirt and khakis walked through the door. The guard gave him a friendly nod. "Good morning, sir. Have a great day." No questions asked, no ID required. She stood there for a moment, watching this unfold, her hand still gripping her phone. Years of business experience had taught her to stay calm in moments like these, to think strategically rather than react emotionally. So instead of arguing further, she simply took out her phone and started recording. "Could you please state your name and position again?" she asked quietly. The guard puffed up his chest. "Ma'am, recording isn't allowed in this building." "Now, I've asked you nicely to leave. Don't make me call the police." "That won't be necessary," she replied, still recording. "I just want to document this interaction. You see, I have a particular interest in how security staff treat visitors to this building, especially visitors who don't, how did you put it, fit the profile." Another person walked in, this time a white woman in yoga clothes. Again, the guard smiled and waved her through without question. "Interesting," she murmured, making sure her phone captured that interaction too. "Very interesting." The guard's face was getting redder by the minute. "That's it. I'm calling the police." He reached for his desk phone. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "While you're at it, you might want to call the building management company too. Ask them about the owner. Tell them what's happening right now. I'll wait." Something in her tone must have finally registered because the guard's hand hesitated over the phone. For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed his face. She kept recording, kept watching as more people entered the building. The pattern was clear and undeniable. Clean-cut white people walked in with a smile and a nod. Everyone else got questioned, scrutinized, or viewed with suspicion. After 15 minutes of this, she had seen enough. Without another word to the guard, she turned and walked out, her phone full of evidence and her mind already planning Monday morning's meetings. What the guard didn't know, what he couldn't have guessed from looking at her casual weekend attire, was that she had started her journey in this very building 15 years ago. Back then, she'd worn a different kind of uniform, pushing a cleaning cart through these same marble halls, studying for her real estate license during lunch breaks, saving every penny she could. She had worked too hard, come too far, to let this kind of behavior continue in her building. Monday would bring changes, big ones. But for now, she walked to her car, her phone heavy with evidence in her pocket, thinking about all the other people who might have been turned away simply because they didn't fit the profile. The security guard watched her leave, still convinced he'd done his job well, unaware that he'd just had his final interaction with the woman who signed his paychecks. Monday would bring quite a surprise, but that was a story for another day. Few people knew the real story behind the owner of the Skyline office complex. As she drove home from that frustrating encounter with the security guard, her mind drifted back to where it all began, 15 years ago in that very same building. Back then, she'd arrive at 4 a.m. every morning, her cleaning cart loaded with supplies, her backpack heavy with textbooks. The night shift guards knew her as the quiet cleaner who always had her nose in a book during breaks. She'd vacuum the same offices she would later own, studying property law and real estate principles by the dim light of her phone while eating lunch alone in the break room. Her parents had always taught her that education was the key to everything. They'd worked multiple jobs to put food on the table, and though they couldn't afford to send her to college, they'd instilled in her an unwavering work ethic and a dream of something more. "You're smarter than your circumstances," her mother would say, and those words became her daily motivation. Working as a cleaner wasn't her dream job, but it taught her invaluable lessons about property management. She noticed everything: which offices had the most maintenance issues, which floors needed better ventilation, how the building's traffic flow could be improved. She kept a small notebook filled with observations, ideas that would later prove incredibly useful. Every month, she'd set aside a portion of her modest paycheck for her real estate license courses. It wasn't easy. Some months she had to choose between new shoes and her study materials. But she chose the books every time, wearing her old shoes until they nearly fell apart. The breaking point came during a particularly cold winter. The heating system in the building had failed, and she watched as the property management company fumbled the response. Tenants were angry, pipes were at risk of freezing, and nobody seemed to know what to do. But she did. She'd been studying building systems as part of her coursework, and she knew exactly what needed to happen. That day, she gathered her courage and wrote a detailed email to the building manager outlining step-by-step solutions to the heating crisis. She didn't expect a response. Cleaners weren't supposed to give management advice. But to her surprise, the manager called her into his office the next day. "This is impressive," he said, holding up her printed email. "Where did you learn all this?" She explained about her studies, her dreams of working in real estate. Instead of dismissing her, he listened, really listened. By the end of that conversation, she had something she'd never had before: a mentor. The manager started giving her small projects to handle during her day shift. She proved herself again and again, moving from cleaning floors to managing them. Her salary increased, and with it, her savings grew. She lived as frugally as ever, pouring every extra penny into her education and eventually her first investment. It wasn't a glamorous property, just a run-down duplex on the outskirts of town. But she saw its potential. During her off hours, she painted walls, fixed leaky faucets, and transformed that duplex into something special. She'd learned about repairs from watching maintenance workers in the office building, and now she put that knowledge to good use. She sold that duplex for twice what she paid for it. Then she bought 2 more properties, then 4. Each success built on the last, each lesson learned making her smarter, more capable. She took risks, but they were calculated ones, backed by years of study and observation. 10 years after starting as a cleaner, she made her boldest move yet. She bid to buy the very building where her journey began. The Skyline office complex was struggling then, mismanaged and losing tenants. But she knew this building better than anyone. Every creaky floorboard, every temperamental elevator, every office with a draft. The purchase took everything she had and more. She leveraged her other properties, took out loans, and worked 18-hour days to make it happen. Many people thought she was crazy to take on such a massive property. Some bankers laughed her out of their offices. But she persisted, and finally, she found people who believed in her vision. The day she signed the final papers, she walked through the building's marble lobby, the same lobby where she'd once pushed her cleaning cart, and felt tears in her eyes. Not sad tears, but tears of pride, of accomplishment, of knowing that every sacrifice had led to this moment. She implemented all the improvements she dreamed up during those early morning cleaning shifts. The building's occupancy rate soared. Its value doubled, then tripled. She bought more properties, always managing them with the detailed attention she'd learned as a cleaner. And now, 15 years after she'd first walked through those doors with a mop and bucket, she had to deal with a security guard who couldn't believe someone like her could own the building. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd faced doubt and discrimination at every step of her journey, but she'd never let it stop her. As she pulled into her driveway, a modest house, because she still believed in living below her means and investing the difference, she thought about Monday morning. She wasn't angry anymore, just determined. This wasn't just about one guard's behavior. It was about making sure her buildings were truly welcoming to everyone, regardless of how they looked or what they wore. She'd worked too hard to build this empire to let anyone be treated the way she'd been treated today. Monday would bring changes, but first she had some planning to do. Opening her laptop, she began to type, outlining a new training program that would ensure this kind of incident never happened again in any of her properties. Sunday morning found the building owner at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold beside her laptop. She'd spent hours reviewing the video she'd taken yesterday, each viewing making her more certain that this wasn't an isolated incident. The guard's behavior had been too practiced, too comfortable. This was a pattern. She picked up her phone and dialed her head of human resources, not caring that it was Sunday. This kind of situation couldn't wait until Monday. "I need everything we have on the new security guard," she said after explaining what had happened. "And I mean everything. His application, references, previous employment records, and all security footage from his shifts so far." Her HR director's voice was thick with sleep, but she could hear him sitting up, suddenly alert. "I'll have it all for you within the hour," he promised. "Want me to come in?" "No, email is fine for now. But clear your schedule for tomorrow morning. We've got work to do." While waiting for the files, she pulled up the building's security footage on her laptop. As the owner, she had remote access to all cameras. She started with yesterday's footage, watching the guard's interactions with various visitors after she left. The pattern was even clearer from this angle: the casual waves to some, the intense scrutiny of others, all based on appearance and race. Her inbox pinged with the guard's employment files. His resume showed 15 years of security experience, all at high-end properties. His references had checked out. But something about those previous jobs caught her eye. None of them lasted more than 2 years. She started making calls. Most businesses wouldn't say much about former employees, but she knew how to ask the right questions. By her 5th call, a pattern emerged. The guard had a history of cultural fit issues and communication problems with diverse clientele. Code words, always code words. The security footage from his previous shifts told the real story. She watched a week's worth of recordings, taking careful notes. A young black doctor in scrubs made to wait 5 minutes while his credentials were verified. An Asian woman in a business suit asked 3 times if she was sure she had the right building. A Latino delivery man followed by cameras as he made his rounds. But it went deeper than that. She noticed how the guard's body language changed with different visitors. The way he'd stand up straighter, become more alert when certain people approached. How his hand would drift toward his phone, ready to call for backup, when dealing with minorities, even well-dressed ones. She thought about all the people who might have been discouraged from coming back, all the potential clients or employees who might have felt unwelcome. As a business owner, she knew the cost of discrimination went far beyond hurt feelings. It was bad for business, bad for the community, and just plain wrong. The sun was setting when she finally looked up from her research. Her coffee had been refilled and emptied 3 times, and her notes filled several pages. But she had what she needed. Monday morning, she dressed with purpose, a sharp business suit that she rarely wore during her weekend inspections. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she walked into the building, flanked by her HR director and chief of security. The guard was at his desk, just like Saturday. But this time, when he looked up, his expression was different. She watched recognition slowly dawn on his face, followed by confusion, then fear. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying across the lobby. "I believe we need to have a conversation about Saturday's incident." The guard stood up, his face pale. "Ma'am, I didn't realize." She held up a hand. "Let's continue this in my office." The elevator ride was silent. She could see the guard's reflection in the polished doors, watching him shift uncomfortably in the enclosed space. When they reached the top floor, her assistant was waiting with a folder of printed screenshots from the security footage. Her office had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, but she'd never seen the guard glance at the view. He sat rigidly in the chair across from her desk, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "Before we begin," she said, opening the folder, "I want to show you something." She spread out the screenshots, laying them in a row across her desk. Each one showed him interacting with different visitors. The pattern was undeniable. "Can you explain these differences in treatment?" she asked quietly. The guard looked at the photos, then down at his hands. "I was just doing my job," he muttered, "following security protocols." "What are you?" She pulled out the security manual. "Because our protocols state that all visitors should be treated with equal courtesy and respect. They say nothing about making assumptions based on appearance." She let the silence stretch for a moment before continuing. "I started as a cleaner in this building," she said, watching his eyes widen. "I know what it's like to be judged by appearances, to have people assume you don't belong somewhere because of how you look." The guard shifted in his chair but said nothing. "What happened Saturday wasn't just about me," she continued. "It's about every person who's walked through those doors and faced unnecessary scrutiny. It's about the clients we might have lost, the talent we might have missed, all because someone decided they didn't fit the profile." She pulled out one more document, his termination notice. "I can't allow this behavior in my buildings. Not now, not ever." The guard stared at the paper, then looked up at her. "I never meant," he started, then stopped. "I didn't think." "That's exactly the problem," she said firmly. "You didn't think about the impact of your actions, but now you have a choice. You can take this termination and leave quietly, or you can help us make this a teaching moment." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "We're developing a new training program for security staff. Your footage would make an excellent example of how unconscious bias affects decision-making. If you're willing, we'd like to use it, with your permission and participation." The guard was quiet for a long moment, looking at the screenshots spread across her desk. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'd like to help," he said quietly. "I never saw it this way before." She gathered the papers together. "Then perhaps something good can come from this after all." She stood up, signaling the end of the meeting. "My HR director will be in touch about the training program." As the guard left her office, she turned to look out at her city. The morning sun was hitting the other buildings, making their windows gleam. Each one of those buildings held countless stories, countless interactions like the one she'd just had. Change had to start somewhere. Today, it had started here. The investigation into the security guard's behavior opened up a much bigger conversation within the company. As the building owner sat in her office reviewing more security footage, a pattern began to emerge that went beyond just one person's actions. She pulled up the visitor logs from the past 6 months, spreading them across her massive desk. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago, but she barely noticed. There was something here, something that had been hiding in plain sight all along. "Could you come in for a minute?" She called to her assistant through the intercom. Within seconds, her trusted employee of 5 years appeared in the doorway, notebook ready. "Look at these numbers," she said, pointing to the visitor logs. "Notice anything strange about the guest check-in patterns?" Her assistant leaned over the desk, studying the data. "The rejection rates, they're not random at all, are they?" "No," the owner replied, pulling up more files on her computer. "And it's not just our recently fired guard. The whole system seems to have built-in biases we never noticed before." The stats were clear as day once you knew what to look for. Certain times of day showed higher rejection rates. Certain types of visitors faced more random security checks than others. Even the language used in incident reports showed subtle but consistent patterns of bias. She picked up her phone and dialed the head of building security. "I need every security report from the last year. Every incident, every rejected visitor, every complaint. Everything." While waiting for the files, she walked to her office window, looking down at the street below. People streamed in and out of the building. Business people, delivery workers, maintenance staff, clients. Each person had their own reason for being there, their own right to be treated with respect. Her phone buzzed with a text from her HR director. "You need to see this." Attached was an email thread from 3 months ago, a complaint about security treatment that had somehow never made it to her desk. She read it twice, her hands gripping the phone tighter with each word. A pregnant woman had been denied entry to her doctor's appointment in the medical suite on the 4th floor because the guard didn't believe she looked like she had an appointment there. She'd missed her appointment and had to reschedule weeks later. The owner sank back into her chair, memories flooding back. She remembered her own mother years ago, being turned away from a fancy department store because she didn't look like a customer. She promised herself then that if she ever had the power to prevent such things, she would. Her assistant knocked on the door again, this time carrying a stack of security reports nearly 2 feet high. "These are just from the last 6 months," she said, placing them carefully on the desk. For the next several hours, they went through every report, creating a spreadsheet to track patterns. The owner insisted on reading each one herself. These weren't just statistics, they were people's experiences. Around midnight, her assistant finally convinced her to take a break. "You can't fix 15 years of systematic problems in one day," she said gently, bringing in a fresh cup of coffee. The owner nodded, rubbing her tired eyes. "No, but I can make sure we start fixing them tomorrow." She spent the next hour drafting an email to her entire management team. The subject line was simple: "Emergency meeting, 7 a.m. tomorrow." When she finally left the office that night, the cleaning crew was just arriving. She knew many of their faces. She made a point of learning everyone's name, remembering her own days, pushing a cleaning cart through these holes. "Everything okay, boss?" one of the cleaners asked, noticing her late hours. She managed a small smile. "It will be. We're making some changes around here." The next morning, she arrived early, watching the sunrise paint the city skyline in shades of pink and gold. Her management team filed in one by one, looking curious and a bit concerned about the unusual meeting time. She waited until everyone was seated before speaking. "Yesterday, we fired a security guard for discriminatory behavior," she began. "But as I investigated further, I realized this isn't just about one person's actions. We have a systemic problem, and we're going to fix it." She clicked through a presentation she'd stayed up late preparing. Slides filled with data, patterns, and real stories from real people who'd faced discrimination in their building. "This stops now," she said firmly. "Today, we start rebuilding our security protocols from the ground up. Every policy, every procedure, every training manual, everything gets reviewed and revised." Someone raised their hand. "This sounds expensive." She nodded. "It will be. But tell me, what's the cost of losing potential clients because they don't feel welcome? What's the cost to our reputation? What's the human cost of allowing discrimination to continue under our roof?" The room fell silent. "I started as a cleaner in this building," she reminded them. "I know what it feels like to be judged by your appearance rather than your worth, and I refuse to let anyone else feel that way in my buildings." She laid out her plan: new training programs, regular audits, anonymous feedback systems, a complete overhaul of security protocols, and most importantly, a new position, Director of Diversity and Inclusion, reporting directly to her. "But this is just the beginning," she said, looking around the room. "I need every one of you to be part of this change. We're not just running buildings, we're creating spaces where everyone feels welcome, respected, and valued." As her team began to discuss implementation details, she glanced out the window again. Below, the morning rush of people entering the building had begun. Each person had their own story, their own purpose for being there. She made a silent promise to each of them. Things would be different now. Real change was coming, starting today. Because sometimes it takes one incident to open your eyes to a much bigger problem, and once you see it, you can't look away. Her assistant poked her head in. "Your 9 o'clock is here, and the new security training consultant is waiting in the lobby." The owner nodded, gathering her papers. There was so much work to be done, but for the first time in days, she felt hopeful. Sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest moments, like being denied entry to your own building on a Saturday morning. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. The building owner stood in front of her closet, carefully choosing her outfit. Today wasn't about comfort, it was about making a statement. She selected a perfectly tailored black suit, her most professional attire, complete with the pearl necklace her mother had given her when she bought her first property. Her phone buzzed with messages from her executive team. They were already and waiting in the lobby of their sister building across the street. The timing had to be perfect. "Remember," she texted back, "let's keep this professional. No drama, no scenes, just facts." At exactly 9 a.m., she pulled up to the Skyline office complex in her modest sedan. Through the glass doors, she could see the security guard at his desk, scrolling through his phone just like he had been on Saturday. He looked comfortable, confident, completely unaware that his world was about to shift. Her executive team crossed the street as planned. Her HR director, head of security, legal counsel, and building manager. All wearing suits, all carrying leather portfolios, all projecting an air of authority. They gathered behind her as she approached the entrance. The guard looked up as the doors swished open, and for a split second, his expression didn't change. Then recognition flickered across his face. She watched as the color drained from his cheeks, his eyes darting between her face and her outfit, then to the imposing group behind her. "Good morning," she said pleasantly, her voice carrying across the lobby. "I believe we've met before." The guard stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. Ma'am, aye." "Please call you're relieved," she said, still maintaining her professional tone. "We need to have a conversation in my office." His hands trembled as he picked up the phone. While he made the call, she noticed other employees in the lobby trying not to stare, whispering behind their hands. News would spread fast, she was counting on it. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent and tense. She could see the guard's reflection in the polished doors, watching him tug at his collar, shift his weight from foot to foot. The same man who had been so confident in his authority 2 days ago now looked like he wanted to disappear into the walls. Her office was impressive, she knew. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Awards and certificates lined one wall, telling the story of her rise from cleaner to real estate mogul. She'd earned every single one of them. "Please have a seat," she gestured to the chair in front of her massive desk. The guard sank into it while her team arranged themselves around the room. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood by the window, looking out at the city she'd worked so hard to be part of. "Do you know how long it took me to buy this building?" she asked quietly. The guard shook his head. 15 years, she continued. 15 years of work, study, and sacrifice. I started as a cleaner in this very building, night shift. I used to vacuum these offices at 4 a.m., studying for my real estate license during breaks. She turned to face him. The previous owner of this building never knew my name. I was just another invisible person keeping his property clean. But I watched and I learned. I saw how this place was run, what worked, what didn't. I saw how people were treated differently based on how they looked. Walking to her desk, she picked up a folder. "Saturday wasn't the first time you've turned someone away based on appearances, was it?" His eyes dropped to his hands. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job, following security protocols." "Really?" She opened the folder, spreading out screenshots from security footage. "Is it protocol to wave through certain people without ID checks while interrogating others? Is it protocol to make assumptions about who belongs here based on their race or how they're dressed?" She laid out more photos, his interactions with various visitors over the past week. The pattern was clear and damning. "I've spent the last day and a half reviewing security footage," she continued. "I've spoken with your previous employers. This isn't new behavior for you, is it?" The guard's face had gone from pale to red. I never meant to discriminate," she finished for him. "Maybe not consciously. But that's exactly what you've been doing. And in my building, that's unacceptable." She pulled out his termination papers. "I could just fire you and be done with it." "But that wouldn't solve the bigger problem, would it?" He looked up, confusion mixing with the shame on his face. "You're not the only one who makes these kinds of judgments," she explained. "You're just the one who got caught, so I'm offering you a choice." She laid 2 documents on the desk. Option 1 is standard termination. You leave today, and we never speak of this again. Option 2, she tapped the second document, is more interesting. The guard leaned forward slightly, reading the title, Security Training Program Development Consultant. "You can help us fix this," she said. "Work with our training team to develop a program that addresses unconscious bias in security protocols. Use your experience, both giving and receiving discrimination, to make real change." The silence in the room was heavy as the guard stared at the papers. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. "I'd like to help," he said quietly. I never saw it from this side before." She nodded, sliding a pen across the desk. "Sometimes we need to see ourselves through someone else's eyes to understand the impact of our actions." As he signed the consulting agreement, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about progress. About turning a negative experience into positive change. "Report to HR tomorrow morning," she said as he stood to leave. "And one more thing." He paused at the door. "Remember how it felt when you realized you judged the owner of this building by her appearance? Remember that feeling every time you're tempted to make assumptions about someone else?" After he left, her team stayed to discuss implementation details. But her mind was already moving forward, thinking about all the other changes needed to make her buildings truly welcoming to everyone. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's progress. And she was just getting started. Monday morning arrived with a crisp autumn chill in the air. The building owner stood in front of her closet, carefully choosing her outfit. Today wasn't about comfort, it was about making a statement. She selected a perfectly tailored black suit, her most professional attire, complete with the pearl necklace her mother had given her when she bought her first property. Her phone buzzed with messages from her executive team. They were all ready and waiting in the lobby of their sister building across the street. The timing had to be perfect. "Remember," she texted back, "let's keep this professional. No drama, no scenes, just facts." At exactly 9 a.m., she pulled up to the Skyline office complex in her modest sedan. Through the glass doors, she could see the security guard at his desk, scrolling through his phone just like he had been on Saturday. He looked comfortable, confident, completely unaware that his world was about to shift. Her executive team crossed the street as planned, her HR director, head of security, legal counsel, and building manager. All wearing suits, all carrying leather portfolios, all projecting an air of authority. They gathered behind her as she approached the entrance. The guard looked up as the doors swished open, and for a split second, his expression didn't change. Then recognition flickered across his face. She watched as the color drained from his cheeks, his eyes darting between her face and her outfit, then to the imposing group behind her. "Good morning," she said pleasantly, her voice carrying across the lobby. "I believe we've met before." The guard stood up so quickly his chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "Oh, ma'am, I." "Please call your relief," she said, still maintaining her professional tone. "We need to have a conversation in my office." His hands trembled as he picked up the phone. While he made the call, she noticed other employees in the lobby trying not to stare, whispering behind their hands. News would spread fast. She was counting on it. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent and tense. She could see the guard's reflection in the polished doors, watching him tug at his collar, shift his weight from foot to foot. The same man who had been so confident in his authority 2 days ago now looked like he wanted to disappear into the walls. Her office was impressive, she knew. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Awards and certificates lined one wall, telling the story of her rise from cleaner to real estate mogul. She'd earned every single one of them. "Please have a seat," she gestured to the chair in front of her massive desk. The guard sank into it while her team arranged themselves around the room. She didn't sit. Instead, she stood by the window, looking out at the city she'd worked so hard to be part of. "Do you know how long it took me to buy this building?" she asked quietly. The guard shook his head. 15 years, she continued. 15 years of work, study, and sacrifice. I started as a cleaner in this very building, night shift. I used to vacuum these offices at 4 a.m., studying for my real estate license during breaks." She turned to face him. "The previous owner of this building never knew my name. I was just another invisible person keeping his property clean. But I watched and I learned. I saw how this place was run, what worked, what didn't. I saw how people were treated differently based on how they looked." Walking to her desk, she picked up a folder. "Saturday wasn't the first time you've turned someone away based on appearances, was it?" His eyes dropped to his hands. "Ma'am, I was just doing my job. Following security protocols." "Really?" She opened the folder, spreading out screenshots from security footage. Is it protocol to wave through certain people without ID checks while interrogating others? Is it protocol to make assumptions about who belongs here based on their race or how they're dressed? She laid out more photos, his interactions with various visitors over the past week. The pattern was clear and damning. I spent the last day and a half reviewing security footage, she continued. I've spoken with your previous employers. This isn't new behavior for you, is it? The guard's face had gone from pale to red. I never meant to discriminate, she finished for him. Maybe not consciously, but that's exactly what you've been doing. And in my building, that's unacceptable. She pulled out his termination papers. I could just fire you and be done with it. But that wouldn't solve the bigger problem, would it? He looked up, confusion mixing with the shame on his face. You're not the only one who makes these kinds of judgments, she explained. You're just the one who got caught, so I'm offering you a choice. She laid 2 documents on the desk. Option 1 is standard termination. You leave today, and we never speak of this again. Option 2, she tapped the second document, is more interesting. The guard leaned forward slightly, reading the title, Security Training Program Development Consultant. You can help us fix this, she said. Work with our training team to develop a program that addresses unconscious bias in security protocols. Use your experience, both giving and receiving discrimination, to make real change. The silence in the room was heavy as the guard stared at the papers. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting hers for the first time that morning. I'd like to help, he said quietly. I never saw it from this side before. She nodded, sliding a pen across the desk. Sometimes we need to see ourselves through someone else's eyes to understand the impact of our actions. As he signed the consulting agreement, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. This wasn't just about punishment, it was about progress. About turning a negative experience into positive change. Report to HR tomorrow morning, she said as he stood to leave. And one more thing. He paused at the door. Remember how it felt when you realized you judged the owner of this building by her appearance. Remember that feeling every time you're tempted to make assumptions about someone else. After he left, her team stayed to discuss implementation details. But her mind was already moving forward, thinking about all the other changes needed to make her buildings truly welcoming to everyone. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's progress. And she was just getting started. 6 months had passed since that fateful Saturday morning. The building owner stood in the lobby of the Skyline office complex, watching the morning rush of people flowing through the entrance. Everything looked different now, not because the building had changed, but because the way people were treated had transformed completely. The new security desk was wider, more welcoming, with a clear sign that read, "Welcome to Skyline. How can we help you?" The uniforms were the same, but the attitudes of those wearing them had shifted dramatically. The former guard, now the head of security training, stood chatting with a young woman in workout clothes who was having trouble finding her yoga studio's new location. "Let me pull up a directory for you," he said warmly, turning his computer screen so she could see it too. "We've had a few businesses move floors recently. Here, I'll show you the quickest way to get there." The owner smiled, remembering how different this scene would have looked 6 months ago. Back then, that same woman might have faced suspicious questions about whether she really had an appointment, whether she belonged there at all. Her phone buzzed with a message from her assistant. The quarterly tenant satisfaction survey results were in. She headed up to her office, eager to see the numbers. These surveys had been one of the many changes implemented since the incident, anonymous feedback forms that went directly to building management. Settling behind her desk, she opened the report and felt a warmth spread through her chest. Tenant satisfaction was up 47%. Comments praised the welcoming atmosphere and professional yet friendly security team. Several people specifically mentioned feeling more comfortable bringing clients to the building. But it wasn't just the numbers that had changed. She thought about all the small moments she'd witnessed over the past months. The security team helping a lost elderly man find his grandson's office. A guard speaking in broken Spanish to make a delivery worker feel more welcome. The daily interactions that showed respect for every person who walked through those doors. The former guard had surprised everyone with his dedication to the new training program. He'd taken his experience, both giving and receiving discrimination, and turned it into powerful teaching moments. His presentation started with that Saturday morning video showing his own biased behavior, then walking through his journey of understanding. I was wrong, he would tell each new class of security officers, not just about the owner that day, but about how I approached my entire job. Security isn't about keeping people out, it's about helping the right people feel welcome while staying alert for actual threats. The training program had grown beyond their building. Other properties in the city had heard about their success and asked to send their security teams through the course. The owner had agreed, seeing an opportunity to spread positive change throughout the community. She walked to her window, looking down at the street below. A group of young professionals was walking into the building, a mix of races, styles, and backgrounds. None of them hesitated at the door. None of them worried about whether they'd be questioned or turned away. That was the real victory. Her assistant knocked on the door. "The newspaper reporter is here for the interview about the security training program." The owner nodded, straightening her jacket. They'd been getting attention lately, positive attention. Other building owners wanted to know how they'd managed to increase tenant satisfaction while maintaining strong security protocols. The reporter set up her recorder, then asked the first question, "What inspired you to completely overhaul your security training?" The owner thought carefully before answering. "Sometimes the best changes come from difficult moments. 6 months ago, I was denied entry to my own building because I didn't look like an owner. But instead of just firing that guard, we decided to dig deeper. What we found was an opportunity to change not just one person's behavior, but an entire culture." She explained how they'd rebuilt their security protocols from the ground up, focusing on behavior rather than appearance, on customer service as much as safety. How they'd trained guards to recognize their own biases and make conscious choices to overcome them. The biggest lesson, she continued, was that real change doesn't come from just pointing out what's wrong. It comes from showing people a better way forward, from giving them the tools and support to change their behavior. After the interview, she walked through the building, something she still did regularly. She passed the former guard in the hallway, now wearing a suit instead of a uniform, heading to train another group of security officers. "How's the new class looking?" she asked. He smiled. "They get it. They really do. When I show them that video from 6 months ago, they can't believe it was me. Sometimes I can't believe it either." She watched him walk away, thinking about how far they'd all come. The incident that could have ended with a simple firing had instead sparked a movement. Other buildings in the city were starting to follow their lead, implementing similar training programs. Later that afternoon, she sat in on one of the training sessions. The former guard was showing the security footage from that Saturday morning, but this time there was a new addition, recent footage showing positive interactions, proper protocols, respectful treatment of all visitors. "The choice is yours," he told the class. "Every person who walks through those doors has a story. Your job isn't to judge their story based on how they look. Your job is to help them write the next chapter safely and respectfully." The owner slipped out quietly, leaving him to his teaching. In the lobby, she paused to watch people coming and going. Business people in suits, maintenance workers in coveralls, delivery drivers, clients, cleaning staff, everyone receiving the same professional, respectful treatment. This was what success looked like, not just in profits or tenant satisfaction scores, but in the simple dignity of being treated with respect, regardless of appearance or position. The incident 6 months ago had taught them all a valuable lesson. Sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best changes if you're willing to learn and grow from them. As she headed home that evening, she thought about how one moment of discrimination had sparked a movement of inclusion, how one person's mistake had led to hundreds of people changing how they treated others, and how sometimes the best revenge isn't punishment, it's progress. Because in the end, success isn't just about owning the building, it's about making sure everyone who walks through those doors feels like they belong there.